Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. It's Improving Supply Chain Agility and Resilience with our Intuiflow for NetSuite product. My name is Tim Root. I'm a Senior Account Executive with DD Tech. The gray beard just belies that I've been working in this enterprise software stuff going back to the 90s, starting with first article inspection system for injection molders and die casters, and then three-dimensional solid modeling and MRO software. And so my role with DD Tech is working with our prospective new customers, some of our large accounts, and then also working with our global network of channel partners. And I'm joined today by Salar Ahmed. Salar is one of our experienced implementation consultants. He's got great experience with our NetSuite product. And that just means he's an expert at turning this on for customers and helping them with success. So Salar, would you do a minute, please introduce yourself and share a couple of your experiences?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tim, for the introduction. Really excited to be your co-host for the webinar today. As Tim mentioned, I've been with DD Tech for a few years and implemented our Intuiflow for NetSuite solution across a variety of industries. So some of the clients include DH Marine, which is a supplier of goods for the marine industry, Brio Systems, which is a manufacturer and distributor of wellness products, and National Food Group, which is a wholesale food service distributor. So had some great experiences implementing the product with these customers, and they've leveraged the tool and gained some really great results from the software. So excited to show you some of the strategies that you can deploy using Intuiflow and some of the benefits it can bring to your business.
Awesome. Thank you, Salar. So, going back to our topic, agility and resilience. So obviously the pandemic and then these subsequent recovery years have really demonstrated for us that there's some brittle supply chains out there. And I think Gartner's new tagline is that the new normal is never normal. And so what we're going to do is focus today about developing that agility and the resilience, allowing you to adapt to whatever comes. And that really what that means, especially from our perspective, is how to become demand driven. So our agenda is going to be, how we get there. And I promise you, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. I've got a couple of slides and charts for you to help set the table for Salar. And so Salar is going to spend the bulk of the time in the product, live demonstration, looking at Intuiflow and how it can help you get that agility and resilience. Right now, everyone's muted, but we want you to please ask questions in the chat, and because we're going to circle back at the end and make sure that we cover those. And we will have a couple of polling questions along the way. We'd love to get your thoughts on some key topics to help us really frame our discussion. So I want to start here just briefly, and it's a couple of interesting points regarding the ERP space at all. So just fascinating to me. This is, by the way, from Gartner in May of this year, so very relevant and recent data. There's no slowdown at all in ERP adoption and spend. It's up to $50 billion a year, which is just mind-blowing. But digging into the numbers a little bit and looking at where that spend is going, we see, and Gartner reported it out, it's moving people to the cloud from on-premise, and just straight inflation, just increasing their prices. And then, of course, AI, which is the buzzy topic right now. And if you look at the NetSuite press releases, you'll see that, their 8 most recent press releases, 6 of them are about AI. And the common theme in this spend and the increase in the spend is that it's still just all about IT. It's very IT centric. And so it follows then that 90% of this spend is actually focused in what they call administrative ERP, which is your human capital management, financial management, and the operational, obviously your manufacturing stuff and your enterprise asset management is a paltry 10% of the total spend. Now, this is really interesting. So our emphasis, of course, is NetSuite, and you're in good company. I was blown away. I didn't know it was 37,000 customers. It was shocking to me. I didn't know their base was that big. And what we contrast that with is Oracle itself has only got 10,000 customers on Fusion. And so NetSuite here is approaching, 4x of the market share for NetSuite. And it really helps to illustrate why at DD Tech we're focused in this space. It's a market we're committed to. We've got dozens and dozens and dozens of customers using our Intuiflow for NetSuite. And it's 25% of our customer base. So we are going to stay focused there. If you're familiar with DD Tech and if you're familiar with any of these events that we've had, you're familiar with this chart, but it remains massively relevant for us. This is why we exist. This is why Intuiflow has been created. There's probably nothing more relevant to manufacturing than how often you sell and consume your inventory in a period. So we know that turns represent a really useful indicator of manufacturing efficiency. And so we're pretty comfortable saying higher turns, generally you're doing better with your inventory management. And so really this is an indictment of ERP and what it has brought or hasn't brought to manufacturers. So billions and billions of dollars spent across 25 years, looking at the investment in ERP back to the mid 90s through 2020. And this is US manufacturers data. It's from the Federal Reserve, and the inventory turns have not improved. We're exactly where we were 25 years ago. And so, the short version of the Goodyear story of Goodyear, in the mid 90s choosing to move to SAP is relevant today. So they had silos of automation, disparate systems that didn't talk to each other, and ERP vendors came along and said, hey, you can have the current operating system, current database technology. It's all one platform. We're going to maintain it for you. And it was great for them, that vision and that message. So they also had, the Y2K concerns for compliance back then. And so they decided to move to SAP. And it's a dream story for IT because their total cost of ownership goes down. The hassle factor with maintaining all these disparate systems goes down. And from the business perspective, the functional areas, they're thinking, hey, this is going to be great. I'm going to get modern systems. Things are going to be updated, gets, some bells and whistles. And you can probably imagine how the story turned out, right? The project goes 2 years past its intended duration, tens of millions of dollars of extra spend. And, lo and behold, there's not a benefit to the order to cash cycle. So it solved problems for IT, but didn't solve problems for the business. And in the end, when we look back and consider how 10% of today's spend, only 10% of it is going towards operational initiatives, we can see that, we're still having this huge opportunity to have an impact through technology on manufacturing. And so that really leads us to our first polling question, and I'll ask Kevin to step in here and share that. Okay, so here's our first question. Have you been able to improve your turnover? It's a pretty simple question. We're looking really probably here recently in the last few years. Have you seen your turns improving? Yes or no? Very simple. So we'll give, I think we try to give, a minute, 45 seconds or so while people are answering the question. Some awkward silence ensues. Well, that's okay. Kevin, you let us know when we've got the answers in and that when it's time to proceed, please.
Will do. We'll give it maybe another 20 seconds.
We need to figure out how to get some Jeopardy music in here.
All right. It looks like most everyone has answered, so I will go ahead and end the poll and publish the results.
Okay. Good. Wow. Look at that. So we see that 90% of the respondents here have been able to improve their turnover rates. And that's awesome. People are doing really well out there. It's really good feedback. Excellent. Hopefully many of you are customers. So let's talk about the VUCA world that we live in today. So VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And really, this is our reality. And so as it pertains to forecasting, Gartner's message is to quit trying to make it more accurate. You're never going to get there. And, we've all experienced the staffing and labor issues that are going on. Folks leaving, they're not staying. The gig economy is competing with us. And this concept of the great resignation, which doesn't even make sense to most of us in the Gen X timeframe. We're constantly in that firefighting mode. And at the same time, we've got increased competition from overseas, from e-commerce. It's why, an office furniture company suddenly has to offer their items in 30 shades of white, where they've got to offer, over 50 different fabrics. So things that were just completely unheard of are now, if you don't, you're not going to be able to compete. And so, of course, we get the SKU proliferation, and we're just constantly working around these challenges. And so the familiar story, in the face of the challenge, what do your people do? We're going to go to Excel. I've got a fire to fight. I just got to get through it and get it done. So I'm going to do quick and dirty in Excel. And we know that that's not, a long-term approach. And so, we're not turning the inventory. We've got the challenges of the VUCA world, and we just need to be more agile and more resilient. And of course, we know that the agile athletes that we watch on Sundays or whatever, for example, they're quick and they're graceful. And we know that our resilient people, they overcome challenges and come out the other side all the better for it. But what does it mean for a manufacturer to be agile and resilient? And so when we talk about that, the agile supply chain means that you can adjust quickly your output and your schedule when you have fluctuations in demand. And so you're agile when you're adapting, and adapting is not a problem for you. And so if you're a resilient manufacturer, these disruptions are going to happen. Can you withstand? Can you recover? And there's maybe not a better example in our world than our customer Cormatec. There's a Ukrainian customer, and half of their supply chain tied to Russia was severed in a day. And they came to our user conference in the spring, and they just told this riveting story about how they were able to withstand and recover and actually grow into a better company on the other side. And we're really proud of the fact that Intuiflow was right in the center of that story. And so can you respond to whatever comes your way, whether it's an opportunity or a challenge? And it really leads a different way of thinking. And let's talk just for a minute about our S&OP and our approach and our thoughts around S&OP. So a traditional approach is going to say, okay, we're going to get our consensus for demand. Everybody's going to agree exactly what our demand is going to be, and we're going to get our consensus of supply. Everything is aligned perfectly, and to the demand that we just are certain is going to come. And the reality is that it's just not going to happen that way. It's not going to work that way, and we're not set up to handle the disruption in our plan. And so what we would say is we want to challenge that convention and not set up to a single forecast, but to a range of potential scenarios that might occur. And if we can build the agility that we're looking for into how we operate. So for example, maybe you don't load up your plant with 100% capacity on every resource and lock it up, because what if a drop-in order comes? It creates that nightmare to unravel. So some of the key components of helping our manufacturers achieve the agility and resilience is we want you to adapt when the market changes. Don't be like Kodak and put your head in the sand and try to fight against it, but adapt to it for your longevity. And we've got to be able to respond to our customers. And I'm sure the manufacturer of 1950 could not imagine any reason a customer needs 20 variations on the shade of white. But if you don't offer it, if you don't respond to the customer requirements, somebody else is going to, and they're going to capture the market share from you. And so as we talk about recovering from disruption, one of the keys will be establishing those alternative sources of supply. You may have a lower cost option coming out of Asia and a local source, but maybe if you have a disruption, you can switch and cover yourself that way. And so we want you to focus on the true priorities. So when you think about conventional MRP messages, it's just a stream of expedite this and de-expedite that all the time. The last week do this week it's something different, try to find the balance and de-expedite that. The expedition from last week creates, problems this week. And so the demand-driven methodology, which is baked into Intuiflow, really helps with that prioritization. We are aligning to the true market needs, and it tells us where to focus. So where does that, go back to the theory here of the traditional MRP? And it's MRP, the prevailing sentiment is it's great logic, right? And we're here to say that it has some flaws. And so diving into that, we discover that some of the core assumptions are just flawed. And, Orlicki working for IBM on the BOM processor to explode demand down through the BOM, time phasing requirements and all that, it just seems very compelling and logical. In the 60s, written down in the 70s, and coded into ERP and MRP in the 80s and 90s. And, the systems they operate on, the MRP systems, traditionally, they're operating on a push principle. Materials are pushed through the production process based on the predetermined schedule. And it requires that we start with our forecast, our demand forecast. And so the sales forecast based on historical sales data and market trends, and we've got our production schedule and the components and the quantities that we need, and then we're going to backwards schedule and calculate the required quantities and the timing of the components and the raw materials needed to meet our production schedule. So it's what you need to buy, what you need to make or assemble, what you need to package and distribute to meet the forecasted demand. And I don't have everything, I don't have the ability to make everything instantly, so I've got to start ahead. I need to start next month's forecast. Maybe I've got a 30-day lead time from when I start buying things to when I can produce the products that I'm going to use to meet my demand. So it seems really simple. What else would you do? But there are some critical assumptions that we have to consider. And so the first one is that demand is known, right? The future demand is known and it's predictable and it's accurate, 30 days out. And I will tell you, as a salesman for 25 years, a little anecdote, right? I have been asked to create a forecast, a quarterly forecast, every quarter for 25 years. And in 100 quarterly forecasts, maybe one of them was right on, maybe. And in an organization where you've got, many reps and partners and customers and new products, you name it, it exacerbates that forecast inaccuracy. Every one of those guys is only going to be right once in 25, years. And so that just means there's massive uncertainty coming through in demand. And then it also assumes that there's no variation. Every supply order is going to arrive on time and in full. Every work order is going to be completed on time. And the transfer orders that you create are going to occur on time. And we just know that that's not the case. Your supply comes late or it's short, the work orders don't complete, maybe a machine breaks down or there's an operator issue. The truth is that there's variation everywhere. And the point about this is that, if you don't accommodate for the variation, then you're going to have problems. And what you're going to get is an exacerbation across your entire supply chain. And so coming back to here, we have to accept the uncertainty of the future. The only certainty is the uncertainty. And it's counter to our human nature, and we want to try to figure that out. But the reality is it's not going to be certain, and we've got to turn to strategies to help us accommodate that reality. And so by embracing the certainty of the uncertain future, that's the first step to becoming agile and resilient. And suddenly our approach changes to being adaptive. And, with the MRP, we're constantly fighting that system because it's based on the flawed assumptions. And so we're going to stop here for a minute. And I think Kevin has another polling question. Kevin, are you there? There we go.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Thank you. Question number 2. Is supply chain agility a priority for your organization? High, medium, or low? And we're going to give folks 30, 45 seconds again to answer, and then we'll continue on.
All right, we'll give it another 10 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's see the results.
Yeah, as expected, high priority, 80% responding that supply chain agility is a high priority. And this is, it fits, right? It fits the research, the industry analysts, manufacturers are trying to get more agile and more resilient. So our message is we feel pretty good. It's aligned. So Solar is going to demonstrate this for you in just a moment, and just a couple of core concepts. So to achieve that agility and the resilience for materials planning, we're not planning the forecast. The forecast informs our ranges for the S&OP process, but we're really pacing our material resupply to the actual market demand, which is the best and most accurate signal. It's the actual orders. And so we're looking for every opportunity to compress the response time. That's a huge factor in remaining competitive and actually gaining a competitive advantage if you can deliver before your competition. And so how do we manage the variation that we know is coming? And that's where we get into this concept of decoupling. So we're intentionally insulating different parts of our supply chain to protect the entirety of the system. So if you have a disruption in one area, the fact that it's decoupled from the others means that, the impact is lessened. And so we've seen how DDMRP buffers in the appropriate places enable the decoupling in our materials planning. So lead time for buffered items goes to 0 because of constant availability. It doesn't mean that we're going to fill the facility with inventory and have parts everywhere. No, we're going to strategically deploy the buffers where they're appropriate. And in the end, what we've seen over and over with our customers is that overall inventory goes down and lead times actually go down also. This next one, we're looking at S&OP. So again, how do we leverage the new approach to S&OP? Again, it's leveraging demand, producing the range of forecasts, and testing your agility and your resilience to deal with those different scenarios, running scenarios and scenarios to answer, where am I maybe going to have some exposure? Where could I have a problem and I need to adjust? So instead of driving the organization to align the stars with a perfect demand plan and perfect supply plan that everybody knows won't actually happen, we want to manage to the exceptions. And when we model out the scenarios, that allows you to take the proactive measures to minimize disruption and the cost of those exceptions. And so what we get is we get improved operational efficiency, enhanced customer satisfaction, on-time delivery, a reduced operational cost, and mitigated risk. And so at this time, I'll ask Solar to take over. I'm going to stop sharing, and he is going to jump into the product and demonstrate some of these techniques for us.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know when you can see it, please.
Yep.
Okay, great. So let me now just pop over into Intuiflow. So starting with the NetSuite homepage here, right? As you can see, I have Intuiflow across the top ribbon here. So Intuiflow is a solution embedded, which can be embedded within your NetSuite environment, right? So there's no integration required. It is a solution consistent with the DDMRP methodology. So I'm going to try to illustrate some of the concepts that Tim mentioned through a demo here. So I'm going to start off with finish part A at the plant as my example to, again, illustrate some of those concepts and try to showcase some of the strategies you can employ to better to be in a position to essentially achieve agility and resilience within your supply chain, right? So starting with FPA at the plant, this is what a sample Intuiflow record looks like. As you can see, across the top, I have some basic information about the item, the description, the planner in charge of it. And then on the right-hand side, I can see the replenishment method, meaning it's I'm holding a buffer on it, what the buffer profile is, and the buffer profile description. And then on the left-hand side over here, in terms of the buffer sizing chart, I can see the current state of the buffer. So again, this is data specific to Intuiflow. We're essentially reading from the NetSuite item record. We don't sort of change or touch the NetSuite master data, right? We're simply reading from it. And the Intuiflow record is built upon that, and the buffer is calculated based on inputs such as lead time, usage, and it basically gives you a current snapshot, right? So I have a 3-zone buffer here. The red zone showing my safety within the buffer. The yellow is my usage over 1 lead time, and the green zone reflects my average order size and frequency. And then it's very visual and allows you to quickly identify items that need to be ordered based on the net flow position in relation to the buffer. So the net flow position is illustrated by this blue line over here. And anytime it's below the top of yellow, Intuiflow is going to give me an order suggestion, right? So it makes it very easy when I'm looking at a group of parts as opposed to just one item right now. Prioritization becomes very clear so that, when I log in first thing in the morning and I'm looking at my items, I can easily identify which items are critical and then which items are high, so on and so forth. The purpose of a buffer as well, as Tim mentioned, is to mitigate some of that inevitable variability and variation in your supply chain, right? So one of the benefits is that it's built upon your actual usage, right? So if the usage for an item is trending up, your buffer over time is going to trend upwards as well, right? If your usage is trending downwards, your buffer is going to decrease over time, right? So again, in line with that message of agility, so that you're basically pacing to the actual market demand and not holding too much or too little inventory. On the theme of resilience, we have the red zone, which is the safety embedded within the buffer, right? So you can, based on your knowledge of the business and your products, you can set up the red zone to basically account for that variation, right? So the tool will again give you some recommendations on what the red zone should be and try to automate that process for you. But you also have the flexibility in terms of being able to size your buffer based on your knowledge of the products. Right, so that's the current state on the left-hand side with that buffer sizing picture that I just talked about. On the right-hand side, this basically shows me the part analytics over time, right? So the buffer sizing again is just the current state, but the part analytics on the right-hand side is showing me basically a historical trend of this particular item at this location, right? So I can see the buffer performance, I can see how the net flow and inventory lines trended, and in essence, I can see, right, how this item performed, whether there were any stockouts. Do I need to perhaps change the buffer profile? Were orders placed on time? So again, gives you some great visibility. And you can essentially look at this graph for your key items, right, and see whether your buffer was set up appropriately, right? Were the right settings in place to give you that resilience to meet, you know, unexpected demand orders or variation, and then you can make adjustments accordingly. I'll also speak to that a bit more when we touch on the topic of S&OP. As I scroll to the bottom of the page here, I have a number of tabs. So I'll start with the buffer details and I'll just highlight some of the key fields. So you'll notice here that I have a couple of different usage options, right? So I have manual daily usage, actual, forecasted. By default, Intuiflow tries to build your buffer based on your actual ADU, right? But we have some flexibility here as well, where, for example, if you have a new item and you don't have any historical consumption to rely upon, you can plug in a manual average daily usage like I've done over here. And then you can specify which effective daily usage method to use by item. So for each particular item, you can say, I want to use a manual ADU or the actual ADU. So again, just giving you some flexibility in terms of how you want to build your buffers. And then as I scroll down here, I can see the replenishment type of the item, right? Whether it's buy, make, or distribute, that will be reflected over here. I also have my fixed lead time and my Intuiflow lead time. So in this case, it's basically showing me that my fixed lead time for part FBA is 10 days, but I have some unbuffered components in my bill of materials, which is why my Intuiflow lead time is 35 days. I'll speak to that more in the BOM tab and try to illustrate the concept of buffering and basically compressing your lead times for your end items. The supply tab will also show you if you have a minimum order quantity, an order multiple, and an order max for the item. And Intuiflow will always try to respect those constraints as they relate to your orders. And then again, like I said, based on the net flow position, which you can see here in the bottom left, and the net flow category, Intuiflow will tell you whether you need to reorder the item or not. If you do, you will see a recommended order quantity populated over here. Okay, so just some really good information from a visibility standpoint, right? You can see the current state of the buffer, you can see the past performance, and then you can see some of these key data points as they relate to your items. In the part activity tab, I can see a running balance of the item, right? So starting with the on-hand inventory position of 130 units. After that, I can see all of the supply and demand affecting this particular item, right? And you'll notice my demand orders, right, whether it's a transfer order or a sales order, are in red, and then my supply that's affecting this item appears in blue, right? And you'll notice that not all sales order demand is appearing in red, right? That's because by default, Intuiflow takes into account demand that's past due today, and then it also looks for order spikes in the future. So this item has a 35-day decoupled lead time. And so based on today's date, Intuiflow calculates an order spike horizon, which you can see here is 10/23. And from that date, Intuiflow will try to see if there are any demand orders due in the future which qualify as spikes, meaning really large demand orders that can perhaps overwhelm my buffer and lead to a stock out, right? The whole purpose of buffering an item is to ensure constant material availability. So we definitely don't want to stock out on a buffered item, right? And to help with that, we have this order spike qualification mechanism. So you'll notice that I have a couple of sales orders due in the future. So I have one due tomorrow on 9/19, one on 10/5, one on 10/7. But of those three, only one of these sales orders appears in red, and it's actually bolded, which indicates that it is a order spike, right? And that's because for this item, my red zone is 74 units. Again, that's the safety within my buffer. And we have set the order spike threshold to 50% of the red zone. Hence, my order spike threshold is 37 units. And then because this order is due within one lead time and the quantity on the order is 50 units, it is qualifying as a spike because this quantity due on the sales order is larger than the spike threshold, right? So again, trying to protect you from that variation and give you a sort of advance warning, right? So that you don't get caught off guard and that you don't stock out on a buffered item. The next tab I'll highlight is the BOM tab. So over here, you can expand or collapse it, right? So as a starting point, it may look something like this, but you can expand it all the way. And this would basically show you your active bill of materials from NetSuite, right? So in this case, you can see again that the fixed lead time for part FPA is 10 days, but my Intuiflow lead time is 35 days. So what Intuiflow is doing is it's trying to figure out the longest unbuffered leg, which you can see here from the legend, the longest unbuffered leg within the bill of materials, right? It's identified PPA as that item because PPA is non-buffered and it has a lead time of 25 days. So that means in the event that I need to manufacture FPA, I need to account for 25 days to get PPA. And then once I have it, I need a further 10 days to produce my end item FPA, hence the total of 35, right? But currently PPA is non-buffered, right? So if I were to change the strategy on this item, I want to illustrate this concept of placing a buffer to compress the lead time on the end item. So I'm going to change PPA to buffered, and I'm going to assign it a buffer profile here. And I'm going to save this item here, save the changes I made. And then based on that, I'm going to go back to FBA and I'm going to refresh my buffer here. And you'll notice that now, based on that change, right, if I go back to the bill of material tab and I expand it, PPA now appears with a buffered symbol next to it, which means because I placed a buffer, I'm assuming constant material availability, so I do not need to factor that 25-day lead time into FBA. Now, Intuiflow looks through the BOM tree and figures out the next longest path in terms of the longest unbuffered leg, which is now SAE, which is 4 days, right? So based on that change, my Intuiflow lead time, which initially was 35 days, has now been compressed to 14 days. Okay, the next tab I want to highlight is the Advanced tab. So this is essentially where you can employ certain advanced features and functions and settings at the item level. So basically, if you wanted to set up an item as min-max, for example, you can set that over here. If you wanted to employ a demand order window to extend the horizon in which Intuiflow considers demand, you can specify that here at an item level. And then we also have this group planning feature, which I'll talk more about when we go through the accept recommended orders page, where essentially you can define these 3 fields, whether it's pallets, trucks, container count, however you want to see your data when you're about to place the order. You just essentially need to define the conversions here at the item level. And then when you're about to place an order in mass, you can quickly see, right, for these 100 items I'm about to order, what is my total pallet count? And then if you have items held at additional locations, for instance, where let's say you have a overflow facility, right? You can even link additional locations, right? So if this item was at region 1 as well, I could select region 1 as an additional on-hand location, and it would be factored into this item's buffer calculation here. I also have the ability to set red zone adjustment factors or yellow zone adjustment factors at the item level. So basically, this would be in the event of a supplier disruption or an event such as Chinese New Year, where I know my suppliers are going to be shut down temporarily. Or let's say you have a temporary promotion upcoming, right, where you expect the demand and the activity to pick up. In that case, you may want to hold slightly more inventory for a temporary period, right? So what I can do here is I can edit the item. I'll call your attention to the expected average or the target inventory right now before I make this change, which is 43 units. And what I'm going to do now is say I want to hold 50 more units in my red zone, which is currently 29. I want to hold 50 more units for the period of October, right? So I can specify my date range over here. I can specify a start and end, and then basically save my changes here, right? And then that would allow Intuiflow to recalculate the buffer and give me an updated view based on that adjustment factor I placed, right? So you'll notice that my expected average inventory went up and the safety in my buffer increased, right? My red zone went up by 50 units. So again, trying to tie it back to that theme of agility and resilience, right? Knowing what market conditions you need to account for, making those changes in the software so that you can meet that increased demand or increased variability by employing such tactics. Okay, another tab I want to highlight is the network view tab. So this gives great visibility into the same item at different locations within your network. So currently we're looking at item FBA at the plant, but as you can see, I have this item across a variety of locations in my network, right? So if I focus on the location tab here, you'll see that it's held at warehouse region 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. And I can see all the net flow elements, meaning the on-hand demand and supply for that item by location, right? So this gives me visibility into my network and say that instead of purchasing the item from a vendor or making it, right, if I have a long lead time or a component availability issue, instead I can look to one of my other facilities and see, okay, if they have enough inventory, can I do a one-off transfer and pull the inventory in from that location as well? The buffer calculation tab shows you the current setup of the buffer, right, and how the different zones are calculated. So again, from a modeling standpoint, the buffer calculation is automated, right? Automated, right? The system does the calculations for you, but you can essentially see how these zones are sized and what your target inventory looks like, right? So the expected average inventory, which is this blue dot on the buffer, is basically your red zone plus half of your green zone. You can see that number over here, how it's calculated, what the net flow is, right? Which is your available inventory plus supply minus demand. And then based on where the net flow falls, you can also see a recommended order calculation. Okay, so we've talked about sort of the operational level, what the buffer looks like right now, through the buffer details and the part activity. We also touched on the BOM tab and showed you how the buffer is calculated. But I want to extend this sort of conversation to a longer time horizon and talk about the S&OP module as well, right? So Tim mentioned the role of a forecast within DDMRP and how we can leverage that to account for different scenarios, right? Account for variation. So in order to do that, I'm going to sort of continue the story with purchase part J over here at the plant. And I'm going to show you the S&OP tabs available in Intuiflow. So again, similar concept, right? Where here you're starting off with the current buffer sizing, the part analytics. You can see the buffer details and part activity, just like we did. But I want to focus on the S&OP tab over here. So to start off with, right, I can see that my current buffer profile that's in place is B11M, right, which means it's a low lead time item or short lead time item, and it has a low level of variability. In my S&OP tab, I can see item level simulations, and I can run these simulations based on a forecast, or I can even base it off my actual demand history. And what the system will do is it will take the current settings and show you a projection of how your buffer would behave. So for this item, I can see that I'm stocking out for 35 days in my simulation period. So a really powerful tool that we have over here is the ability to run item level simulations. So I'm just going to click on that run simulation button. And as you can see from here, again, I'm seeing the item level simulation, and I'm going to go into buffer variables. So here you can play around with these current settings for the item, right? Such as the lead time, the MOQ, the buffer profile, and see what impact changing one of those variables would have on this picture, right? So currently, like I mentioned, this item has a B11M profile, and I can see that I'm stocking out, which for a buffered part is not ideal, right? The whole point of buffering, like I said, is constant material availability. So based on my expected demand, my current buffer setup is not resilient enough to meet what's coming down the pipeline. So what you can do here is experiment with changing the buffer profile. So currently it's a B11M. I'm just going to change it to a B15M. I'm going to keep everything else consistent, but try to change the variability aspect of the buffer profile. And I'm going to run my simulation. And once it's complete, you'll be able to see the impact of that particular change on this item. And you'll notice now that on my days stocked out field, previously I was at about 35 days. Based on that buffer profile change, I have a much thicker red zone. I have more safety built into my buffer now. And in my simulation, I'm no longer stocking out. So again, this ties back to the theme of resilience and, looking at your current setup, your current model, bouncing different scenarios off of it and seeing whether you have the right setup in place in order to be responsive to market demand and to be able to meet the demands from your customer. So now we've sort of covered an item level overview. I'd also like to talk about the ability to place orders out of the system. So again, starting with the item level view, if I'm looking at a particular Intuiflow record, I can very quickly click create purchase order from here, right? This is a buy item. So what would happen here is if I were to click create purchase order, it would populate your sort of default NetSuite PO form. And the great thing about Intuiflow is that it also respects any workflows you have in the system. So if a purchase order needs, approval, if it meets a certain dollar amount, those workflows would be respected by Intuiflow. You also have the ability to create orders in mass. So now I'm going to go over into the planning section. So I just went over to Intuiflow, I hovered over planning, and now I'm going to click into the accept recommended orders page. So previously we talked about everything at an item level view. Now essentially we're seeing all of your items in one place, and they're prioritized by your net flow category or your priority, and then the net flow percentage, right? So the deeper the net flow is in the buffer, the more critical it is for you to order that item. And when you open this page, the items are automatically sorted based on that logic. And here, what you can do is you can also sort of filter the page, right? So if you're just a buyer for the plant location, or if you're in charge of one particular region, you can filter this data by location. You can filter by planner code. If you're just in charge of buy items, you can just select buy over here in the replenishment type filter, and you can also filter by vendor here. So once you've made your selections, you can click this button, and then you'll only be seeing your purchase parts on the screen. Another great benefit of this screen is that it is highly customizable. So what you can do is, if you wanted to add or remove columns, it's essentially a save search, which you can modify to hide columns, change the column position. If certain columns aren't applicable to you, you want to remove them, you can do that as well. You also have the ability to click on this magnifying glass. If you wanted to see more information about the item, I can click here, and this would bring up this pop-up window and show me those key tabs that we just walked through when we were going through parts FBA and PPJ. So I'd be able to see the buffer details, the part activity, the network view, so on and so forth from this screen without opening it in a new tab. And then you also have the ability to hide these data links, right? So the page is very customizable and you can set it up to your liking. And once you want to proceed with the order creation process, you can simply start checking items over here, and you'll notice that the color changes right from the category to green, and you'll notice that the order quantity column populates with Intuiflow's recommended order. However, that isn't fixed, it's not set in stone. If you wanted to change that order quantity before submitting the order, you can certainly do that. And then you also have the ability to select different vendors, right? So since NetSuite is the system of record, that's where you have your vendor list. You can essentially click this drop down over here and pick a different vendor, right? So again, tying it back to that concept of being more agile. So if one of your vendors is not able to meet your demand, right, and you have customer demand of your own that you need to satisfy, you have the ability to make that quick change over here and submit a PO to an alternate vendor. What's also great about this screen is that you have these two panes that are collapsed by default, but you can open them up. So I'm going to start with the order details section, and this will basically give you information about the order you're about to place in terms of the part count and the order value. And this dynamically updates as I select more items. So you can see the sort of number of items you're about to order, how many orders will be generated, and the overall order value. And then what you can also do is open up the group planning section. And I touched on this when we went through the individual item. And on the advanced tab, you can basically define the conversions and then see the data before you're about to place your order. So if I open up group planning over here, based on the items I've selected and I'm about to order, you can see the number of pallets worth of inventory, for example, that you're about to order, right? And if I were to select all items on this page, you'll see that those numbers dynamically update. And then once I've reviewed the order suggestions, if I've made any changes or if I've changed any of the order quantities, once you're okay to submit the order, you can simply click the generate orders button. That will trigger an ad hoc script in the background and it will generate orders for you. So again, a great tool if you want to create orders in mass out of Intuiflow. The next section I want to highlight is the part maintenance tool. So the part maintenance tool is in Intuiflow. So I'll start with the replenishment method audit over here. And basically over here, I can see, I can specify a demand pulse threshold and I can say, okay, show me items that are currently buffered at the plant location that have had less than 10 demand pulses, right? And I can click this get recommended changes button after I sort of build my query, right? And this will show you a list of items that are currently buffered, but they haven't had any demand in the past year, right? The threshold is 10, so it's going to show me all items that have had less than 10 hits in the past year. So this helps with essentially deploying the correct strategy for the item. So if I haven't experienced any demand, and maybe it's an item that's going to be discontinued, I no longer need to hold a buffer on it. I can quickly switch it to non-buffered by clicking this accept change button and then submitting the changes. Vice versa, if you have items set up as non-buffered but demand is picking up on them, you can employ this tool again to quickly change the replenishment method from one to the other inside of Intuiflow. And then the next tool I'll highlight is the Smart Buffer Profiler. So this is focused on your buffered items and is basically showing you for items that are buffered, right? I can see a report by location, which will show me how the item should be set up. So it's going to show me my current buffer profile, my recommended profile, right, based on my changes to lead time and variance that may have occurred. And then you can also see the current target inventory and then the new target inventory, right? And based on if you were to accept these changes, you'd be also you would be able to see the change to your inventory in units and dollars. So for this item, I would be going from 93 units of target inventory down to 37. This is my inventory savings in units, and this is my inventory savings in dollars, right? And then you can see those anticipated or expected changes at an aggregate level as well here, based on the total number of recommended changes. Okay, so I know we're coming up on time here. We have about 5 minutes left, so I just wanted to highlight some of the key strategies you can use inside of Intuiflow to build better agility and resilience with in your supply chain. And I just wanted to highlight some of those key features. So that is all from my side for today. Tim, I'll pass it back over to you for final comments and to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you, Salar, very much. All right, so we want to leave some time for a couple of questions, and we do have a couple of summary items, but we're just going to go straight here. So we do have some great customer success stories that you can access using these QR codes on the left, and this will take you straight to the story from our website and give you some real world examples of customers just like you who implemented Intuiflow for NetSuite and the success that they had. And then on the right, one of the best ways to get introduced to Intuiflow yourself is to see your data live in it in real time. And so that's a simulation that we offer for anyone who's interested. And follow that QR code. It'll take you right to the place where you can sign up for a simulation. And so at this time, I think, Kevin, I'll ask you if we have any questions that have come in the chat during our time.
Yes, we do have a couple in the chat, so I will go ahead and ask those. And Tim and Solar, you can go ahead and get those answered. The first question is, does the built for NetSuite version of Intuiflow have production scheduling functionality?
So you have the ability to create work orders for your make items, but there isn't a production scheduling module per se. But we do offer that as part of our enterprise product. So if there's interest in that, we'd be definitely happy to show that offering as well.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, how often does Intuiflow sync with NetSuite?
So we have a variety of scripts that run in the background. One of the main ones I would say is a update buffer script that runs roughly every 15 minutes to pick up any changes in terms of your running balance. So if you have supply and demand transactions affecting the net flow of the item, there's a script that runs pretty quickly every 15 minutes, tries to keep that information as updated as possible. We also have an overnight script that runs in the background to update the buffers, make any ADU recalculations. And then the accept recommended orders script is ad hoc. So that runs basically when you when you click that submit orders button that I showed, that would run in the background again to generate your purchase orders or work orders or whatever it is.
And that may lead into the next question. The final question I have is, are purchase orders approved in Intuiflow automatically created in NetSuite?
Yes, so you have great flexibility, right? I showed on the Intuiflow record, you can click that create purchase order button, and that will basically populate the NetSuite PO form with the item, the quantity you're about to purchase, and the expected receipt date, right? And then, like I said, if you have any workflows native to NetSuite that need to be met, Intuiflow would respect those. And then similarly on the accept recommended orders page, you can quickly create purchase orders. It would create those purchase orders in NetSuite for you, and it would actually also group them by vendor. So when I showed that example of buy items, if you're ordering 20 different items and they belong to 2 different vendors, Intuiflow would automatically do that grouping and separate them by vendor.
All right, thank you, Solar. And that was the final question. I want to thank everyone for coming in and participating. I'll hand it back to you, Tim, to close things out.
Well, I'm looking at my clock, and it looks like that we did what's called hitting the post in the industry. We're right on time. We thank you so much for your participation, and please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you, and be happy to help you figure out how to make your supply chain more agile and resilient. And with that, we will end the webinar. Thank you.